Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Leaders Series, GCS Connect Leaders Series. Today we have Suhail Khan. He is the Director of Development and Engineering at Huawei Technologies, based in Munich in Bavaria. What I really enjoyed about speaking to Suhail was he seems a very calm leader. You know, someone that deals with a lot of big projects, a lot of big global projects, and I feel really deals with them and goes through his process of dealing with them in a really understandable, really clear, and a very calming way. So I hope you'll enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I felt I learned a lot from Suhail. So without further ado, here he goes. It's Suhail Khan. Suhail, good afternoon. How are you?
Hi, David. I'm good. How about yourself?
Very well, thank you. Today, yes,
Yeah.
it's a Tuesday where we're recording this, so start of the week and all that.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, the year is progressing quickly, and it's always great to kind of speak to another one of the leaders in our network. So just to kind of introduce, we have Suhail Khan here. He works at Huawei Technologies, which is obviously a world famous, world beating company, and he's director of development and engineering there, within their kind of German locations based in Munich. 15 years experience in the industry. And we're really happy to kind of have him on board. I know he's done quite a few podcasts and different public speaking engagements, but so we're very lucky to have him. So welcome to Hale. Do
Thanks,
you want to
David.
just quickly, before we start, just take us a little bit through your role, a little bit through your background, just so the kind of listeners can get an idea of what you're about, really.
Sure, David. First of all, it's a big pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you.
And I've seen some of your episodes, and they were really interesting, especially focused on the leadership aspects of it.
Yeah,
So it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you here today. So at the moment, I work as the Director of Development and Engineering at Huawei's Consumer Business Group. And we
sure.
are focused on building software solutions for our customers in multiple industries, starting with IoT to consumer devices to healthcare to robotics. So yeah, at the moment I'm involved in quite a few verticals. Really fortunate to be in these as these industries are growing quite a bit at the moment.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to be kind of developing software across industry.
Yeah.
Um, do you when you start to do that, do you when you move into a new industry, and we've spoken a little bit before this that you've worked in different types of industries. Do you have a kind of set of principles or a set of ways that you look at things as a leader that you think that helps you to right we're in a different industry now? So if you went into the recruitment industry, you
Yeah.
think about certain things that you need to understand before you progress.
Well, as I was really fortunate to have worked in multiple industries,
Mm.
but the underlying principle is the same everywhere. Always look for gaps when you start out in a new role or in a newer industry. And
Mm.
the challenges are always around the processes and also around delivery and improving the efficiency. So, from a high level
Sure.
perspective, these are the three characteristics I always try to look out for in any industry, whether it be automotive or IoT or business software as well.
And do you use quite a lot of kind of business analysis or work with your business analysts or UAT or user requirements just to really kind of
So,
understand?
I've always been a firm believer in user driven development. So it
Sure.
always comes from the user's requirements. The customer is the king. And
Mm.
yeah, I've always used that as my foundational base before I start building processes around it. And also, interestingly, I always try to keep the structure of my teams to work in an agile methodology.
Okay. Yeah. And have you worked? I mean, obviously, 15 years in, I guess maybe you've always worked in an agile methodology, or have has your
Yeah,
career progressed along with agile, or did you used to use waterfall or other
absolutely has.
types?
You'd be surprised to hear
Yeah.
when I started out, Agile was still a buzzword, but it's caught on quite a bit now. So back in the day when I started, it was all waterfall. You'd always have your requirements, and you just continued to build based on deadlines without really iterating your products. But
Mm.
this has changed quite a bit at the moment, and I was lucky to learn a lot of things along the way and also adapt the different agile frameworks based on the needs of my customers or also based on the needs of my teams or the organization itself.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. It's really interesting, isn't it? And as agile within our world as a technology recruiter has become so kind of all encompassing now. So many people have kind of moved forward, and it's obviously you have to set yourself. But what do you find the kind of challenges are when maybe setting up an agile environment or moving from a waterfall environment or trying to get agile, you know, to the higher standard to kind of A grade agile.
Yeah. Well, in my case, it was by failing fast, right? I've been on complex software projects since the early days of my career, and I'm a firm believer in what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. One of the beauties of
Mm,
Agile is that
me too.
it offers a chance for the teams to have a retrospective before you start your next iteration, right? So retrospective always helps in identifying failures from the start and from the entire team's perspective. But sometimes this isn't enough. In the beginning, when you defined your agile blueprint on how you would want your setup to look like, you really need to systematically and scientifically break down the structure, right? There are multiple methodologies and frameworks that you can reference to, from Scrum to Kanban to feature driven development to Lean to Less to Safe. There are so many variants of Scrum in the market at the moment. But in my case, I never really followed textbook Agile, right? I rather use those frameworks as a reference and define my own, which suited the needs of the product or the projects I was on, or also based on the kind of skill sets I had in my teams. But the
Yeah,
underlying foundation is always the same. You define your framework, you start with the high level vision, you break down uh, into business processes, and from these business processes you define your epics, and then these epics you could derive your tasks and user stories.
and it's very it's a different way of kind of like leadership, isn't it? Because it's much more, I guess, high touch. I mean, as you said, we spoke very much on leadership here. It's not like let's review this every 2 months. It's like let's constantly review
Yeah.
this. I guess that takes quite a lot of certain mentality, and certain level of rigor to constantly be appraising things. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, it definitely does. Also, the biggest challenges I've faced in an agile environment was even before having an agile environment, trying to change the mentality of the whole organization,
Yeah.
trying to change the mentality of the people, trying to bring them on the same page. It requires quite a bit of effort, right? And agile, it really it's built on principles of having transparency and also having more adaptation and iteration to what you're doing. So yeah, having people on the same page was definitely a big challenge for me as a leader.
And was that kind of change management? Because again, we go back. For those that don't know, maybe they're listening
Yeah,
in. Maybe it might actually be quite good for people to understand what the hell we're talking about when we say
yeah.
agile. So maybe Suhail, for those lay people out there, I've heard agile so much in my last 10 years of technology recruitment. Even though I wouldn't, I could explain it, but I don't know it. But do you just want to quickly explain to us what we mean when we say an agile project?
So agile is more of a philosophy than a framework. So it's a way of
Mm,
working, right? Traditionally, you would
mm,
have waterfall development, which is the opposite of agile. You would have your requirements, you take these requirements and you start building it. and then you test it, and in the end you have a product, right? So but in
Sure.
Agile, what you have is an iterative way of building things. So you rather, instead of building everything at one moment, you build it iteratively, right? So you're
Sure.
right. Agile is the first step of any digital transformation project. And yeah,
Mm.
it's always a challenge to adapt people to the new processes. And it's also a challenge, especially as you mentioned, with resources that are less flexible, because adapting to
Yeah.
change management is such a big thing in itself, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly. And do you how do you deal with that? When you're when you're looking at something you need to deliver, like you said, you're coming into a new industry, you're understanding where the
yeah.
gaps are. That's something we can kind of talk about. But how do you deal with those people that are maybe blockers or slowing the process down?
Well, the first step is always defining the correct agile framework which fits your product or needs. It's about defining how you would want your sprint cycles to look like, how would you want your cross-functional teams to look like, how would you want your agile ceremonies or events or meetings, however you would want to call them, to look like,
Mm.
because I've had different experiences. So in a typical agile setup, the teams are supposed to be self-organized, but there have been instances where some of the teams also felt like they've been micromanaged. Um,
Sure.
being a developer myself, uh, my kind of people
Yeah. Yeah.
love working in silos. We want to be left alone and working alone and
Sure.
delivering
Yeah.
whatever comes out of it, right? But
Yeah.
Agile in a way kind of forces you to also work in teams, work in a cross-functional way, share your responsibilities,
Yeah.
also, yeah, have give enough transparency to what you're doing at the moment. So, and not a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
people adapt to this flexibility initially, but it has proven results. It's always good to build your products in a modular way, bit by bit, so that you can identify your failures early on.
So you build it kind of from success. Obviously, you're coming into a new project saying we've done this before.
Yeah,
This has worked well. I guess identifying leaders around you that are your supporters or
yeah,
cheerleaders, as it were. Some people will hate change. Some people are like, yeah, we've been asking for this change for ages, right? And I guess identifying those people is very important for you to kind of this is
yeah.
these are the game
Yeah,
changers, as
yeah.
it were.
Identifying the right kind of skill sets for an agile way of working is quite critical. Uh, yeah, as a
Yeah,
leader, it's very important to have your entire team on the same page, working towards the same goal, having the same vision, and yeah. Otherwise, it would be a big bottleneck. Fortunately, throughout my career, I've been
yeah.
surrounded.
Everyone will be arguing.
Yeah,
Everyone will be arguing. Not collaborating, but arguing. Does that change the way you like interview
eh,
people, Suhail? Obviously, I guess like we know within
yeah,
technical interviews, let's say you're looking for Java or you're looking for Python. You've got
yeah.
certain technical questions, but would you interview people and say, have you got certain questions that you use or scenarios to test the
Absolutely.
mentality?
So for a resource to be a technical fit is definitely a plus point, but for a resource to be both a technical fit and a culture fit is what I always try to look out for. So you can have someone who's extremely brilliant technically, but you can't expect this one resource to do everything. You always have to think from a perspective of a team and how multiple people come together to build something meaningful, right? So for me, I always try to look out for team players, and yeah,
Sure.
and also, so I always try to look out for people who can contribute a lot of value, and at the same time also increase the value of people around them as well. Yeah,
Right. So skills transfer, that sort of thing.
yeah,
And so again, for our listeners, maybe people that work in a similar role to you, would you advise very much to not just focus in on the technology aspects, and also like look at the soft skills quite hard, really understand
Yeah,
people's psychology?
absolutely. Soft skills is critical. I've had instances where I've had people who were brilliant developers, or they were really, really good technically,
Mm,
but they could never really communicate well. So
mm,
this had a lot of issues. On one hand, their work wasn't visible enough, and on the other hand,
yeah.
yeah. Uh, there was a gap in information in the entire process itself because they were bad communicators. So it's important that,
Yeah.
yeah, you hire people with good soft skills and also with the right attitude.
And then I guess you also have to kind of review those first few months and weeks as well. When you talk about fail fast and technology, but you have to review that people can kind of come up to speed, because obviously some people do well in interviews, some people don't do well in interviews, but you're expecting a certain type of people. I know from experience, they don't always turn out, do you? What you get in the interview is not always what you get on the first
That's
day, is
really true. Yeah, I we could do an entire episode on speaking about bad hires.
it? What happened to that
Yeah,
person? Yeah, no, exactly.
but
It's a tricky one.
also, but I'm a firm believer in trying to train people and help people grow. For me, the definition of success itself is growing the value of your team. uh, s- as a leader, you're their main enabler, right? So, and it's up to the leader to train them, to
Yeah.
help them see gaps within themselves that they wouldn't normally realize. And yeah, so I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in improving people's skill sets, whether it be soft skills or even technical skills.
And if I look rightly kind of back on, when you obviously, like you said, you're one of those people that's kind of come up through the ranks. So you've done it, and now you're in a director position where you're running multiple projects, multiple, nationalities, global. You know, and obviously a lot of leaders that we spoke about. I'm a recruitment consultant. I'm a recruitment CEO, so I have that background. I know I've been there in the trenches, as it were. But do you one of the things I noticed when you become a leader, you have to almost divorce yourself from some part of what you used to do, and maybe what you even used to enjoy. Like you enjoy doing coding, enjoying being part of the scrum as opposed to leading the scrum. Um, has that been a difficult transition through your career? Everyone's got aspirations that they want to move forward, but sometimes people find that the job isn't quite as interesting as the one they started out doing, or quite as fulfilling sometimes.
The leadership was, it was quite organic how it came to me. So you're right, I really started from the
Mm,
bottom as a software developer, and then grew on to roles where I had to lead a few people initially, and then this just grew further on. So this helped me learn
mm,
from not just my own mistakes, but also from the mistakes of other leaders or other managers I had at one point. Yeah. So
yeah, yeah,
this helped me learn
yeah,
what are the best practices on how you manage teams. What's the
sure.
bridge between doing operational work, like coding on a daily basis, to delivering a final product, to also strategizing future roadmaps. So yeah, it definitely
Mm.
helps to start out from the bottom and grow organically as a leader as well.
Do that apprenticeship as you kind of move forward. And the other thing we mentioned there was obviously these large organizations that you work for. And we talked about the kind of the agile process. We talked about working in different industries. One of the things I'm quite interested in, because you've made a quick progress in your career, so obviously you've
Yeah.
been successful as you move forward. But what's your advice for people that are maybe taking on, not just new industries, but new and larger teams? I guess you've had to test yourself at some point to say, well, I was running a team
Yeah.
of 10, now I'm running a team of
Yeah.
100, now I'm running a team of 1,000. What was, you know, how do you go about that? How would you advise those?
Yeah.
Suddenly, I'm running this big global team. What should people again do to make sure they're doing a good job and dealing with it?
Been asked this quite a few times, especially because at the moment I work in an organization that has over 200,000 employees in over 66 locations globally,
Yes.
right? So it has a big multinational footprint with really large teams. And I'm really fortunate to be managing these multinational teams. The number one best practice for me would be to understand the work culture of that place. So not in a way that you would stereotype
Sure.
a certain region or certain resources from a certain region, as my experience has always taught me that
Mm.
every individual is unique, irrespective of where they are from. But rather try to understand what kind of projects these teams or individuals have worked on in the past and what kind of people they've worked with in the past, right? So I could give you a
Sure.
nice example. I used to have a team from a location which I do not want to name, but due to where this team was located,
Mm.
they
Yep.
were treated mostly as an outsourced wing of the company rather than as an internal team, right?
Right.
So their mentality was mostly to work in silos,
Mm.
and they were treated more as vendors rather than colleagues, right? Yeah. So their mentality was to mostly
Mm.
work in silos and to also be really cautious in their approach. So the first thing I did was try to change this mentality and make them feel that they are part of one big team. And I think COVID definitely helped in bringing remote
Mm.
teams closer to you. Yeah, remote work, I think,
Sure.
has helped us empathize also, and help us make understand how these remote resources could work and what issues they would face as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I thought I find it it's definitely helped with the kind of it's one of the key positive aspects of kind of running global teams like we do at GCS. We have our offshore delivery centers. It's helped us to integrate people into the team. Sometimes I think it's quite funny that you forget what time it is, don't you? If you're dealing with India and you're like, oh, hi, good morning, and like, well, I'm doing you just, because obviously everyone's working like follow the sun and stuff. You just forget, and I guess that's an empathy thing as well, just to kind of understand that your 4 o'clock in the afternoon is your so
Yeah.
how is your kind of 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but in India,
And also the mentality of people in
you know,
different locations could be different. So I've noticed that in some of the locations, people
yeah,
live to work rather than work to live, right? So there could be instances where not your entire team is working with the same energy and dedication. But yeah, as a leader, you have to balance that out.
yeah, and I think for me, it's just really kind of interesting when you start to take on those teams. And the other question I had to have was as you grow, because you mentioned how you work in different products, different software teams, and obviously I'm assuming you've got different projects going on with maybe different outcomes, different software. So again, that's you know to me your the story of your career, story of your leadership is of ever increasing complexities, right? It's multiple strands. Um, again, how, and I think a lot of it, I'm asking you a lot of questions. How do you do this? How do you, But I think our listeners will be very, very interested in that. How do you really deal with those different kind of complex projects, and what sort of kind of reporting tools do you use? How are you kind of structuring your day so your
Yeah, so one thing I always try to do is really look for the fundamentals and the basics of what we want to achieve. So I think as long as you have your vision clear
yeah,
as your foundation, you can derive everything based on that. So you can derive how many resources you want. You can derive how do you plan your capacity in running the teams, how you can build your whole framework around a clear vision. So a clear vision from the stakeholders or from you yourself as the business owner is quite critical. It always comes down to the vision, right? And yeah, having a clear vision also helps you in having clear expectation management along the way. It helps you in doing roadmaps. It helps you in, yeah, it basically defines the business processes around it.
And it helps you to communicate things, right? If you've got that
Yeah,
clear vision, then
absolutely.
then you can
It definitely
then
helps in
tell people what
communication
your clear
as
vision
well.
is.
And another critical thing is to try to be more adaptive to the kind of product or project you're on. So, for
Yeah,
example, I had a project in my past which was both software and hardware. It was a software hardware product, right? And
okay.
in hardware, it's very hard to
Yep.
be agile because, yeah,
Yeah, the product's made, isn't it? Already, you're tweaking it, aren't you?
physical,
Yeah,
basically. So you rather try to build your hardware more in a waterfall way,
sure.
in the traditional way, and then you try to keep your software agile, but both need to go hand in hand in order for you to have your product out in the market at a certain point. Right. So there you cannot use a traditional
Sure.
agile framework.
Yeah.
You really need to adapt it based on how
Right.
the hardware project stream is going. You need
Yeah.
to map your timelines and your sprint cycles and ensure that they coincide with the hardware development as well.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because we talked earlier
Yeah,
about how looking at the universality between projects and what you're going to do and the people, but I guess the excitement part of
it
it,
is.
being the sort of leader that you are, is that every single project is
It
different,
is.
right? That
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
you, you can never
Yeah,
can't be bored, can
especially
you?
in agile projects, and as I mentioned, you always have retrospective. So, in a retrospective, it's not just you as a product owner or a business owner who gets to know what were the issues that the team faced. Um, yeah, but it also becomes transparent to everyone involved that there are certain issues that need to be dealt with that you wouldn't have foreseen or imagined yourself as well.
No, no. There's a word I was going to go back to that we spoke about at the start called gaps. And I was quite kind of interested in that. Just firstly, when you say gaps, I mean, obviously people know what the word means, right? But what do you mean when you look at a project and you say, I want to find the gaps?
Something that's less efficient, a bottleneck in the process, I would say. Um, yeah, for example, if a certain team has has been offering less value over a period of time, or they're really slow in their delivery, that's a gap, right? So having more efficient processes, having constant delivery, having quality delivery is quite critical, I would say. And that's where I define my gaps around the bottlenecks of what could be holding something on. So an example of this would be I had a team once which was which had quite a few senior resources. They were quite skilled and they were really experts in what they do, but at the same time they were quite slow. Right? This was a testing team that I inherited once, and they would take a really long time to finish their tests. So this would be a big bottleneck in the entire process. So we couldn't release our product until it's been tested and certified. Um, the gap there was that they were so good with what they do that they were also super thorough with it. They would really look into smaller details and spend a lot of time on the smaller details, and this slowed down the entire process. So we had to tweak what needs to be certified and tested to improve their delivery as well.
You strike me as someone who's quite calm, Suhail. I feel like from speaking to you, I feel like some of the things you talked about is how you kind of go in, manage change, manage maybe conflict, that sort of thing. but you strike. I mean, maybe I've only spoken to you for a couple of times, but you strike me as someone that could put across the way you just said, quite slow. I feel like you could put that across without winding people up too
Yeah,
much. Is that something you pride yourself in?
yeah.
Other people probably would like get people's back up and cause a
Uh,
massive argument, but you strike me as quite a calm person. You
well,
know,
a lot of people have told me that. I try not to panic, and I always try to find a middle
yeah,
ground. But at the same time, as a leader, I also
sure,
expect an output to be there at the right time, right? You need to have this because every leader also has stakeholders they have to report to. It can be the CEOs, CTOs,
sure,
and so on.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, there has to be a fine line between being too aggressive
yeah.
or being too soft, I would say.
And I guess that comes back as well again to leading by example. Like you said, like you've got stuff you need to do, then you're doing that at the right times, etc., etc. That's I always find that's kind of important for me to act as if I tell people to
Yeah.
act.
And I would say empathy is a very important skill for
Mhm.
leaders to have. We tend to take it lightly at times. And in order to be really empathetic towards my team, I always try to also be hands on at the moment so I understand their pain. I always try to also
Sure.
dig deep into some of the bigger problems they might be having. This also helps in expectation management between me as a leader and between my teams, right? So I think a lot of leaders get this wrong and put a lot of pressure on their teams, which leads to an unhealthy working environment, a toxic working environment. I've experienced it myself in the past. So I always try to be as empathetic towards my teams and try to really understand things from their perspective and try to shield the team from the other stakeholders as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. It sounds, I always think there's quite a lot of the leaders, but it's kind of it's like a sports team, isn't it? You're kind of thinking about like a cricket team or a soccer team. You've got to get them focused, got to get them working to the right things. You've got to keep them at right standards. But in the end, you've got to make sure that they're enjoying it and working together as a team, don't you?
Yeah, and this is why I also emphasized on someone being a culture fit is quite important
Yeah. Okay.
because it just takes one wrong hire to ruin the mood of the entire team, as I've experienced in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I know it's always about talking from experience and learning from experience, and like I said, failing fast. If you because you can learn from experience, but like we know that you can always make the same mistake again, can't you? It's like, oh no, I've done that one. So excellent. So for you, in my kind of final question now, Suhail, looking forward to the next kind of year within your organisation and for yourself personally, what are your key priorities for the year ahead? What are you looking to achieve?
So at the moment, the tech industry is not in its best position as it was maybe a year ago or during the pre-COVID time. So my first priority
Yeah,
this year is to really grow my team's value and also grow my own individual value as well. So for growing my team's value, I of course need to
sure,
hire the best and surround myself with
sure.
experts and hope we deliver a few successful products this year. And yeah, make sure that my
Mm,
teams over exceed the expectations. And to grow my own value, I need to keep learning. So, learning new skills, learning new technologies, and most importantly, as you said, learning from new experiences or failures that might come my way this year.
good stuff. Well, I'm very certain there lots of people listening to this have learned quite a lot from yourself. So, hell, I certainly have. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you and a real pleasure to see someone's being so successful within their career and delivering so many projects. So it's been fantastic to speak to you today. I
Thanks,
wish
David.
you well over the next kind of year or two, and I'm sure that there will be a continuing success. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, David. It was a pleasure.